What if you were stranded on a Skyblock island and the only way to escape forced you to complete crafting trees that looked like this? For the last 500 days, I've handcrafted everything, but no more. I need to automate everything if I am going to survive. But an autocrafting network is only as fast as the amount of machines it has. Or is it? With ludicrous circuits now accessible to us, we can create the ultimate automation machines, large multi-blocks enhanced with a parallel hatch, forcing one machine to act as many. But we are yet one item away from automating everything. Nether stars. To automate all things, we must first power many things, and right now we're still mooching off a diamond burning plant. It's time to upgrade our HV combustion engines into extreme combustion engine multi-blocks. So it's a good thing that we have plenty of tungsten steel prepped and our 4 LUV circuits ready to go, because I want to make 4 engines, and not only do they cost an LUV circuit each, but also hundreds and hundreds of tungsten steel for all of the casings, intakes, gearboxes, and dynamo hatches that we need to craft. It's so much crafting, in fact, that I make an IV extruder to speed up the process of manually making all the pipes and rotors. I cannot wait for this to be automatic, because it takes me over an hour to handcraft everything we need to make our newest and bluest power generation tower. I stack all 4 of the engines on top of one another, running into some multi-block sharing weirdness as I do, but eventually our tower of intakes and casing rises high and proud. But now the HV combustion engines are in the way of progress, so I must disconnect them, placing my base back on a limited power supply. We've got to go fast. In their place, a tower of vacuum freezers is erected, 4 of them, one for each of the engines, as each one will supply its adjacent engine with all of the liquid oxygen it needs to become oxy-boosted, quadrupling their energy output. And to cap off the tower, a brewery to make lubricant, which our engines will need to keep them spinning. Now all I have to do is run various pipelines and wire lines to connect the machines to an oxygen and high-octane gasoline supply, and route the large amount of resulting EU into a converter and our flex network. And after a small jumpstart, each one of these combustion engines begins to generate not 1, not 2, but 4 amps of IV power, meaning we're now creating 4 amps of LUV power infinitely. Yeah, that should hold us over, and enable us to reignite our entire air distillation setup, and round out our ore sieving machines as well, adding the remaining 3 that we're missing to now passively produce every single ore in the game forever. And even better, I get to remove our old sieves and upgrade our cobbleworks too, in order to power our base into a new age of processing. And just as a treat, I spend some time upgrading our flex energy buffers to hold over 3 billion FE, because why not? And now our base finally matches our esteemed tier of technology. Well, without all that autocrafting we're here for. We need IV emitters and sensors, which both take upgraded forms of nether stars, and many future machines will need those too, and a lot of them. So we want our nether stars to be passive, and they're made from 8 of each elemental charges, which means we need all 4 elemental powders: Blaze, Basalz, Blitz, and Blizz. And Basalz and Blizz powder require materials from the platinum processing line. It's time. Today, we automate everything, and that starts with platinum. We must passive the plat line. Time to prepare many circuits, as well as a passive supply of sulfuric acid, which you use a decent amount of. And after prepping a few LCRs, we are ready and raring to go. Passive nitric acid is step 1, and pretty easy with our LCR friend. Just feed them nitrogen, hydrogen, and oxygen, all things that are found in the air and very safe to breathe, and together they make a really deadly acid. Chemistry's weird. What else is weird is the amount of time I lose running back and forth to my AE system, so I take a brief detour to create a wireless grid, so that with the press of a button, I can access my things from anywhere in my base. Well, anywhere within 48 blocks of my base. Our nitric acid needs to end up in 2 places: a chemical reactor making platinum group sludge, and a mixer making aqua regia, which we can use a fluid pipe with an upgrade to round robin it. From plat sludge creation, we'll also make some sulfuric nickel solution, which can be separated into nickel and sulfuric acid, so that's a tasty byproduct. And now, if you recall, the platinum group sludge turns into 5 different materials, all of which we need to process. So to move them all around, we're going to use the power of storage drawers to teleport them, but we've all seen the plat line a million times over by now, so why don't I cover it one last time through song? Raw platinum's electrolyzed into dust and chlorine. Raw palladium's reacted with some hydrochloric acid. Inert metal turns into ruthenium and rhodium. Add sulfuric acid, splits it into dust and sulfate. Ruthenium tetroxide and rhodium sulfate. Electrolyze rhodium sulfate for dust, and it makes some sulfur stuffs for even more acid returns. Ruthenium tetroxide gets mixed up with carbon dust and makes CO2, which we can harvest carbon from. Rarest metal mixture makes iridium and osmium. Large chemical reactor filled with hydrochloric. There's a complicated loop to get our acid back and make the metals too. We'll need pipes and chemical reactors, distillation powers, way too many piping issues, kids. All of our acid, and even some osmium and iridium metal too. Oh, and the sludge residue makes some gold and silicon dioxide, which is pretty cool too. Now we've got platinum, palladium, rhodium, ruthenium, and iridium, and osmium all chugging away, which means we are more than able to craft up our first few nether stars. The powders are all made in a reactor, so I go ahead and make a large chemical reactor to process them all in. Each powder asks us to combine some dust with some gas, and it all just takes a while, so while they craft up, let's prepare a new multi-block that we're going to need to actually make the nether stars. The implosion chamber, a machine that can turn dusts back into gems, and the only way to convert the nether star dust we'll be making into actual nether stars. It's really easy to make, it's just a box of steel, but it must be fueled by explosives, which is the part that we don't have access to yet. I want to make some industrial grade TNT, so first we need the nitration mixture, a combo of nitric acid and sulfuric acid, and then we're going to combine toluene, polyethylene pulp, and sugar to make a substance called gel toluene. Not fun to play with or to eat, and by reacting the gel toluene with the nitration mixture, we get a really powerful bomb. So don't try that at home. Our powders are still crafting up, but that's fine because we're still missing some ingredients. To turn the powders into the charges, we need gunpowder and coal dust. Coal dust is real easy as we have coal by the thousands, and then gunpowder is just made of coal dust, saltpeter dust, and sulfur dust, which we also have by the thousands. And with our new explosive materials in hand, we can mix the powders up into many charges. But it takes 8 of each to mix into a nether star essence, and only about an 80% chance to succeed. And that nether star essence then gets bathed into radon to become a nether star shard, which is macerated into only a small pile of nether star dust. We need 4 small piles of nether star dust to make 1 full nether star dust, and we need 4 full nether star dusts in order to make 3 actual nether stars in the implosion chamber. But boy, are they beautiful. No wither required. Bathing our nether stars in more radon turns them into the highly useful quantum star that can make our IV emitters and sensors at last. But that took a while, and even with the Platline passive, it's really expensive to spend a stack of rhodium and a stack of platinum just for 3 nether stars, especially since you need 2 of them for 1 single parallel hatch. There is a different method though, one I had hoped to avoid, but it seems it is inevitable. Mystical agriculture. We can't grow nether star essence directly, but we can grow blizz, basalts, blitz, and blaze rods, but it will not be simple. We'll need to just about master mystical agriculture to pull it off, which means our setup needs to be way bigger than it is and probably moved. So I extract a few machines we're no longer using and begin to make a dedicated area of the base. And woe to the Create mod, as here I tear down the final remnants of the spin mod. May it rest in RPM. Behind the scenes, I'd been mixing up some nature essence as we're really gonna need it in droves, so with 16, we can make the seeds. And I even make some wood seeds just to have an additional supply, and I even vein mine a huge chunk of my AE. Oh shoot, I didn't mean to do that. Well, after fixing that mess, I decided to put the agricultural setup nearby the Platline passive and get to setting up our greenhouses. Our goal here is to make tons and tons of nature essence, as it can be extracted for a 1% chance at life essence. And 32 life essences can be centrifuged into all the essences for our elemental rods at varying low chances, of course. So we'll need 16 life essence to make seeds to grow, to more to centrifuge until we have 16 of the rod essences to make to grow, and more infinite nether stars. Yeah. Now all of that's gonna take a really long time, but luckily it's not just as simple as that, so we've got other stuff to do in the meantime. We need special essence fuels to grow the seeds and burning fuels to process the essences. To upgrade our current inferium essence, we need to use a special multi-block, and from there, we have a choice to duplicate them inside of an essence duplicator using weirdly named fluids, or we could just use more of the same upgrade multi-block, and it's faster to do that, and it's free. So yeah, we're gonna do that. They are big boys and kind of expensive, as it takes hundreds and hundreds of various casings to make, and we need 3 of them to keep a supply of the blue essence that we want. And after crafting oogles and boogles of steel casings, stainless steel casings, black steel frames, okay, it's mostly steel stuff, we have what looks like a chunk of a particle accelerator just lying around in our base. Each one of these essence upgraders will run at IV power, which will mean that they all run faster than their next step, so we can buffer each of the tiers of upgraded essences just in case we need them. The end of the line is Imperium Essence. It's blue and powerful enough to grow what we need. And now that we have it, we can now grow the seeds, but we need the fuel to process their outputs, and that is a lovely little substance called 2.2.2 Cryptand Lithium. What a name. And now, pronouncing words that barely count as language with D. Jojo the Owzo. To make our cryptand, we need to start with making glycol diamine dust, and for that we need palladium on carbon dust reacted with triethylene glycol diazide dust. Oh, and just for fun, let's look at the EMI crafting tree for this. Great! Well, triethylene glycol can be made by combining oxygen, water, and ethylene in a large chemical reactor. Then we need potassium hydroxide, a combo of water and potassium. We'll want to make some sulfur dioxide and to add chlorine to it to make thionyl chloride. And then we take the thionyl chloride and mix it with toluene to make 4-toluene sulfinyl chloride, I think. Next, we can now take all that weird junk we made and combine it into glycol ditosylate dust. And that's not the end of the segment. Sodium azide dust comes from sodium dust and nitrogen gas, and that combined with the glycol ditosylate makes triethylene glycol diazide dust and sodium p toluene sulfonate dust. Now, palladium on carbon is at least as easy as it sounds, and sodium hydroxide comes from salt water as normal, which we can turn into soda ash with some added carbon. And now, the moment that I've finally been waiting for, soda ash, triethylene glycol ditosylate, and the triethylene glycol diamine to create 2 buckets of 2.2.2 cryptand. But it is not ready yet. We need to infuse it with lithium, which is an arduous process for some reason. And once we use the lithium-infused cryptand, it'll go back to being regular cryptand, so we need a proper loop. This is going to require some resource redirection, however, as we'll need lithium chloride to do this, and the only way to make that is through our tungsten passive line. But the problem is that the lithium chloride is used to resupply the system with chlorine to keep it running. So we need to reroute the lithium chloride and inject our external supply of chlorine into the system anew. Thankfully, aside from the lithium chloride, infusing the cryptand is a loop. We'll have a mixer outputting items into a chemical reactor, and that chemical reactor will output items right back into the mixer. These boys are going to trade lithium perchlorate and sodium perchlorate forever and handle the largest aspect of the infinite lithium infusion loop. And the chemical reactor will also make some salt water, which will break right back down into sodium to use with the lithium perchlorate to make the infusion work. And we even get a little cameo from the Create mod here, as I use it to regulate the input of lithium chloride. And look, I know about robot arms. I know I could have just used those, but I felt really bad for tearing down the Create mod, okay? And now that we're infusing cryptand, we don't have 16 life essence yet. What is the essence of life anyways? Is it just waiting around for life to grow around you? Is it watching it centrifuge away into dust and flame? Or is it the fact that I realize I can't use my 2.2.2 cryptand because that requires ZPM power, which I have 0 access to right now, and I had to create an entirely different fluid called 12 crown, and I even forgot to record it? Probably not. In fact, the essence of life is actually a bunch of weird rods, because that's what we get out of it. In order to process these essences, though, we need IV essence burners, and each one of those is going to require an IV emitter, so 1 nether star. So instead of using all of our nether stars right now, what if we make a system that cycles through each of the essences, burning them one at a time? But how? And where? And what machines to do it with? God, if only there was some kind of belt that could convey my items one at a time. And so the glorious return of the Create mod, forever feeding my essence burner one essence after the other in a beautiful march of rod-fueled power. And now to cement nether stars as the next automated item of my base. 4 mixers, 1 to make each charge, and those will need to be fed with coal dust and gunpowder. The coal dust is just coal in the macerator, but we're gonna need to process saltpeter ore into dust before we can do gunpowder. We can even pull out some valuable potassium dust by thermally centrifuging the saltpeter instead of just hammering and washing it, so add potassium to the official DJojo list of passives, which is not a real thing. And now using some robot arms and clever IO setup, we'll make sure our mixers always have what they need inside of them to make my charges forever. We can use storage controllers to congregate all of those charges into one mixer that will forever combine them into that 80% chance of a sweet, sweet nether star essence, and from there, radon bath, macerate, packing, kersploding. Actually, put a pin in that kersploding part because we don't have any passive explosives, and I want a passive TNT. We can export polyethylene sheets and sugarcane into macerators to make the sugar and pulp that gets reacted with toluene for jailed toluene, the base of all good booms, and that is combined with my very infinite source of sulfuric acid to make ourselves TNT now and forever. And against all the odds, we have infinite nether stars. IV and above technology is busted wide open, and baby, that means parallel. Now that we have easy access to nether stars for quantum nether stars, we can taste parallel hatches, but each one rings up a cost of 4 ludicrous voltage circuits. And with quantum stars in hand, I feel somewhat inspired to progress to our next tier of circuit, the quantum circuits, cutting down our cost of LUV by quite a lot. And since we can now make the IV circuit assembler, nothing's in our way. Time to put a cat both in and out of a bag. Superimposed possibilities stacked upon one another. Quantum processing. We'll still need nano CPUs to make these, but also their upgraded form, qubit CPUs, which are green, and that means better. We'll want plenty of qubit CPUs and nano CPUs, so we got to engrave a bunch of regular CPUs and start the arduous process of reacting them to upgrade them a bunch. So let's work on getting the reinforced circuit boards that we're going to need. To make the base of the item, the reinforced epoxy sheet, we can just bathe cheap carbon fibers in epoxy resin, but we'll need copious amounts of annealed copper foil to turn them into circuit boards, so it might be time for a faster arc furnace. And good lord, does an IV arc furnace go absolutely nuts on copper. And while that goes, I start to bulk up a bunch more etching fluid. That'll take some time, so back to qubit CPUs. We need a good handful of quantumized, so let's bathe a bunch up right now. God, do I love Radon.
For legal reasons, Teachers of the Awesome does not love Radon and urges all viewers to ensure Radon levels are at an acceptable saturation within their homes. Remember, kids, radiation is only funny Gregtech.
We also need some liquid gallium arsenide, which is not an issue for us, and with a stack's worth of eyes and liquid gallium arsenide, we can make 32 qubit CPU wafers just waiting to get cut. And while that runs, we can now etch our new circuit boards. It has to be in a clean room, and it takes a really long time. So I gotta sit here and wait. And by wait, I mean make endless swaths of SMD components and wires and circuits, but like half of that is waiting anyway, so it still counts. And I can count all the way up to 64, a full stack of LUV circuits right at our fingertips. And that means we can now begin automating everything. We'll want to work our way up to being able to autocraft even the highest tier of circuits. So we'll begin with the basics. Plates, wires, and machine parts each can be crafted from the stress-proof casing-themed large multi-blocks. The large wire factory, the large material press, and the large extrusion machine. And in the background of this video, secretly, I've been smelting loads and loads of ABS alloys in order to prepare for the army of multi-blocks that we'll be using. Each of the large multi-block controllers requires a matching machine at IV levels, so we'll be slowly cannibalizing our IV line here. We'll start with the wire factory and material press, since I can wall share them easily, and since they're mostly just stress-proof casing, we're ready to go make our first parallel hatch and get to building. First comes the wire mill, and we'll be adding 5 input buses to it. Why 5 when wire mills typically only take 1 input? Well, each bus is set to a different crafting card with distinct buses enabled, and that will allow us to route materials into different buses for different crafts. From 1x to 16x wires, as easy as that. Large material press over here gets 3 inputs for plates, double plates, and foils. But the extrusion machine takes the cake for inputs, as it doesn't care about crafting cards, but does really care about extrusion molds, and we'll want an input bus for each mold we use, every pipe, gear, and bolt. And with that, we've got all the stress-proof casing multi-blocks up and running. Well, not actually, because they're not powered and they're not hooked up to AE, but, you know, we still can't craft rods yet. Well, sure, we could craft them with the extruder, but lathe gang, rise up. Shockproof casings and cutting blades are needed for the large cutting saw, which can either be a lathe or a cutter, so we'll actually need another one of those later on. They take a red-looking form of haste alloy, which I managed to biff the math on crazy and just don't have enough of. So no problem, we can run the ABS at ludicrous voltage for a real quick smelt of even more. And in the meantime, I'll craft up a few more energy hatches. But the meantime doesn't last that long at LUV smelting times, and since we need to bend a bunch of ingots, we may as well test out our new 4x bender. And just look at the way it devours a stack of ingots. That is actually crazy. We can now make all the casings we need for our soon-to-be massive lathe, and with some ultimate gears made in our fancy new extruder, Clifford the Big Red Lathe lives. Everything from plates, wires, rods, and gears can now be made 4 at a time, all in one spot. Let's hook this thing up to AE. Now, autocrafting with applied energistics is pretty great. You make a block called a pattern provider that needs to sit connected to the input of your machine. You'll fill it with patterns, which are instructions for items and fluids in and out, blueprints for crafting recipes. All the provider does is send a batch of items and fluids when the system requests it. Hot tip, when adding your pattern providers to your world, name them in an anvil first. Even add the crafting card number to their names, and it'll be so much easier to sort them. Now, pattern providers do the sending, but crafting CPUs do the thinking, and they're made of 2 parts, the crafting coprocessor and the crafting storage. More coprocessor sends more actions at once, and more crafting storage means more steps that can be taken. But the storages take storage components, and I want big, fat 256K ones, so why should I craft those manually when I can just craft those automatically? Yes! This is the perfect time to showcase autocrafting. Crafting table recipes are done inside a machine called the molecular assembler, which of course is attached to a pattern provider. And in order to make patterns, we need a pattern encoding terminal and some blank patterns. Encoding is really easy. Click the recipe from EMI and hit the arrow, ta-da! We can even remotely send the patterns into the right terminal from a pattern provider access terminal. Here I'll use an extended one, as all my providers are extended versions. Now, even though I don't have crafting CPUs made, so I can't actually autocraft, I can still schedule the craft in my system and see all the bits I'm missing. Oh yeah, there we go. Just need a few more circuits, which come cheap, and we're actually missing some important machines for our basic crafts. The furnace and alloy smelter, which I forgot about completely since we've pretty much already had them. Yeah, the multi-smelter from ages ago is the large furnace/alloy smelter. You get it really early, and it doesn't parallel with parallel hatches, it parallels with higher tier coils, so it's really overpowered. And easy peasy to link up to the autocrafting system, just need some pattern providers. After some last bit of manual crafting, I make up a 256K crafting storage block and a coprocessor to boot. Our first CPU is live, our autocrafting empire begins! But we must automate everything, and what better way to fill in the gaps of our auto-crafting than to make it up as we go? Pattern on pattern, multi-block on multi-block, the world around me begins to move autonomously. Naturally, the assembling factory should be our next goal, as wires, rods, and plates are pretty useless on their own, and an assembler is needed to coat, shape, and craft loads of parts. Now, before you get too excited on me, assembling factories and circuit assembling factories cannot be overclocked like the other large multi-blocks, so no tier skipping for Hootie Jojo. Still, there's no reason not to unlock the potential of parallel assembling. But we do have an additional challenge with our assembler here: fluids. Up to this point, all we've needed to input are items, but now there are recipes that expect both items and fluids, and we're gonna have to get kinda creative here. Or we could just passive a supply of common fluids in the machine at all times and never have to worry about it. So I'll just add a nice fluid cell to our AE drive and get cracking on with the assembler build. Easy peasy, because we have all the parts and bits we need for it, but those pesky fluids are still in our way. And what are those fluids, you might ask? Well, nothing but the dubious plastic pentuple and the slithering styrene butadiene rubber. That's right, it's time to revisit our passive polyethylene, polyvinyl chloride, polytetrafluoroethylene, and to add two new plastics to the passive mix, polyphenol sulfide, and the most advanced plastic we have access to, polybenzimidazole. And yes, it really is pronounced like that. But let's start simple. And by simple, I mean ripping out established infrastructure for something better. Polyethylene needs ethylene, and boy is it slow the way we do it, but thankfully we can juice up some butene with steam and extract enormous amounts of ethylene from it. Just one more cracking unit and a cute little 3-tall distillation tower nets us a bucket and a half of ethylene every 6 seconds. Woof. With ethylene being made directly, polyethylene is extremely easy to passive. Just slap some oxygen on it. Next up, PVC. One chemical reactor adds chlorine to ethylene for vinyl chloride, and another adds oxygen and polymerizes it to make polyvinyl chloride. Good for making anime figurines, pipes, and chlorine gas if you're not careful. Up next is the chemically inert polytetrafluoroethylene, or PTFE, or go to hell. Before we needed a magical blend of chloroform and acid, but now we can just use a large chemical reactor to make the tetrafluoroethylene from methane, chlorine, and hydrofluoric acid. And as is the case, these bonds are looking pretty monogamous. Domain expansion!
Polyamory oxygen.
With that taken care of, let's take a quick break from the plastics and passive up the queen of rubber, styrene butadiene. Reacting ethylene and benzene makes styrene, and combining that with butadiene from our distillation makes raw styrene butadiene rubber pulp. Dust it up with some sulfur, and blammo, good rubber. Now is a good time to route our new plastics and rubber into the assembler, as they'll allow us to coat our wires and make our machine holes. And after a quick repair during a test, we can now make things like MV item buses with no manual crafting on my end. Sick! Well, let's make sure we have everything ready. Polyphenol sulfide is used in coating even higher tier cables. Sulfur and sodium mix for sodium sulfide, and chlorine and benzene make dichlorobenzene. And with just a bit of fluid and item routing business, we're making polyphenol sulfide, baby. And now for my final trick, the old razzle, polybenzimidazole. This baby is the cheapest plastic to use for buses and carbon fibers, and is required for the large mixer and advanced SMD components, and becomes a required material for higher tier machines. And it is no short order. We need to make diaminobenzidine and diphenol-isophthalate. Side note, isophthalate is spelled with a PH, but it's silent. What? Why? Literally, why? That is the worst and ugliest rule in the English language. I can't imagine. Why is it not isophthalate? But no, it's isophthalate. Anyways, diaminobenzidine is up first, and for that we'll want to steal access to the nitric acid we're mixing back at the plat line. That nitric acid gets combined with sulfuric acid for the nitration mixture, then we'll make some chlorobenzene from, I'll let you guess, and combining it with the nitration mixture from earlier nets us nitrochlorobenzene, which gets routed right into a large chemical reactor alongside copper dust and hydrogen to make dichlorobenzidine, which is not the final step. It only sounds and looks like it, as we need a dose of ammonia and the presence of zinc dust to convert into valuable diaminobenzidine. Now up to bat, diphenyl isophthalate. We need to make some phthalic acid, and again, it's the same thing with a pH, which is great because we already make part of the recipe, dimethylbenzene from distillation, but we still need some potassium dichromate dust to make it all the way. We need to combine chromium and oxygen for a very dangerous dust, and then that with potassium for potassium dichromate dust that nets us our phthalic acid when combined with dimethylbenzene. And it just takes a little bit of sulfuric acid on the top to finalize the creation of diphenyl isophthalate. Just one more large chemical reactor to combine two ingredients into lovey-dovey polybenzimidazzle juice. God, that was a ride. Well, into the assembler it goes, and we are ready. Ready for what? More machines! We can now make the large mixer and might as well join it with a maceration tower and extraction machine too, so that we can make any dust, any liquid that we can dream of. Our mixer needs a new alloy we haven't messed with yet called osmiridium, the combination of osmium and iridium, go figure, and it's a job for LUV smelting, so our EPF goes into overdrive. And with autocrafting at our fingertips, it couldn't be easier to make the multi-block controllers and casings. Setting up the large mixer is a real treat though, as again, we need to be conscious of items and fluids, and unlike the assembler who mainly uses 4 or so fluids, the mixer wants just about anything, and pattern providers require one single output source. So we need to somehow trick the provider into outputting into multiple fluid sources and item sources. Thankfully, we have a little mechanic of applied energistics called subnetting, a method of creating a mini network attached to your main one. We can take our pattern provider, connect it to the main network, and we place an interface looking into it. Now the interface is offline at the moment. We'll need to power it by connecting it to the pattern provider through cables beginning with the quartz fiber cable that will power the interface but not connect it directly to the network. But because it's an interface, it can see the entire network. Now we just equip it with some storage buses attached to our inputs and outputs and subnet. Now this is going to allow us to autocraft anything, anywhere, at any time. And for the mixer, we give it card none, 1, and 2. And thankfully for my brain though, the macerator and extractor are 1-in, 1-out machines that just need plain old pattern provider setups to work. What would be nice though is a polarizer of some kind. Oh, and look at that, we can make a big one. And although it needs some blue seal, we can easily craft that up by encoding all the patterns needed into our macerator and mixer. I need to run around doing a little bit more circuit crafting and osmium smelting, but soon our large electromagnet is alive and ready to polarize. And boy am I tired at crafting circuits on my own. But adding them to autocrafting is a big ask. Not only will we need a chemical reactor, laser engraver, cutter, and circuit assembler, but all of those will need to be within a clean room. And considering these huge machines are huge, we'll need a huge clean room. And that's gonna take a lot of plasticrete and clean room glass. So why did you think I made the mixer, extractor, and macerator together? Well, because they're gonna make concrete and liquid glass production automatic. So all of our clean room blocks will just fly out on my request. I plan for our new Giga clean room to overtake our current one, so I want to make sure that I have everything set up before tearing down the current one, as I wouldn't want to run out of circuits and be stuck, now would I? So pattern, and another big smelt of an alloy to shore up the supplies for our laser engraver. Kinda guessed at how much cleanroom supplies we'll need. I feel like 2 stacks of plasticrete and 4 stacks of cleanroom glass might be good, but I guess we're gonna find out. I start with the frame of a 10x10 cleanroom setup, which should maybe be enough room, but the only way to know is to fill it with machines. Let's do the laser engraver first, it looks cool. Big old box of redness that I stuffed with 10 input buses, 1 for each different lens that we use, and the build is really simple considering its shape, which is a good thing, because I definitely should not have built it first. I should have built a circuit assembler on the ground and had this one above it, so down it goes, and I replace it with a circuit assembler. Then I put the cutter on top of it, and there's no way I can fit the laser engraver and chemical reactor in the way that I want, so we'll need a bigger cleanroom. In fact, just assume that the size of the cleanroom continues to get larger and larger because I keep underestimating the quantity of blocks you need to make it. But after some tinkering, we can now jam all of our machines in there, and sadly the large chemical reactor doesn't actually parallel. In fact, I don't think there is such a thing as a paralleled chemical reactor. It is pretty sad. But we can get all of our machines cuddly, snugly fit inside. It's time to make them comfortable by boxing them in the walls of glass and ceilings of filters. And as for routing power into the giant clean room, I'll just use flux networks. I mean, we don't need to do anything with input holes, except for AE, which can come through input holes. It takes a lot of fussing with spacing and cables and interfaces and such, but after a while, we have all the providers set up. Circuit crafting is now at the tips of our fingers. But just the tips, because we still don't have advanced SMDs. We're gonna want them for advanced circuit crafting, because for now they're cheaper options and later will be a requirement. They're not going to be the easiest to encode recipes for, since they require some pretty intense EBF tier materials. Oh yeah, we need the high-speed steels, G, E, and S, to make all the SMDs, as well as an indium, gallium, vanadium, chromium, molybdenite, graphite, and tungsten steel passive supply. Yep. We have our work cut out for us. Our current EBF line is fine, and I don't really want to tear it down, so we're just going to start a new one off to the side and tear down the old PTFE plant to make some room for other machine lines. I bulk craft 9 EBFs, but we don't have enough HPIC chips to actually make 9 IV energy hatches, since we're out of indium, so let's get that on the passive floor. We'll need 2 ore washers, one purifying galena, the other sphalerite, which we can send into a mixer to combine with sulfuric acid into indium concentrate. That concentrate is reacted with aluminum dust to make us some nice, clean indium dust and some trash byproduct that I do not care about. Well, that should be it. And it looks like energy hatches are back on the menu. So back to the EBF at hand. We're a bit behind on our passiving journey, so let's get tungsten, tungsten carbide, and tungsten steel all smelting passive, as we just have a huge need for those buggers. Way more tungsten steel, but the others have their uses. All that goodness is routed into the EBFs, who split their outputs back into AE system to get sent into a vacuum freezer. No drawer storage here, as we'll be relying on levelometers to control the smelting limits. I also make sure to buffer a stack of the tungsten steel and tungsten carbide dusts, because who knows, it could be useful. Oh wait, I know it's useful, because HSSG dust needs tungsten steel. Their mixer setup is real simple, of course, but HSSG is hungry for resources we don't have passive, vanadium and molybdenum. But as luck would have it, we have access to an ore processing multi-block made entirely from tungsten steel. Good news, as I have that passive now. Bad news is that it takes a lot of tungsten steel, and I can only begin to make this weird looking base for them. C'est la vie with passive machines, all you need to do is wait. And wait, I do, but only long enough to make one of them because it's boring. I want to process molybdenite ore into molybdenum dust, but we'll need a passive supply of sodium persulfate if we want to do that. So we gotta automate combining salt and sulfuric acid to make sodium bisulfate, and then electrolyze that into our tastium sodium persulfate. And the machine also makes an oddly sick beat for some reason. And now we can begin molybdenum processing, and enough time has passed that we can afford even more machines. Bauxite with sodium persulfate to make gallium and rutile, tantalite with sodium persulfate to make niobium and manganese, but after firing up all the ore processors, I'm missing one. We need cobalt too, which is distilled water and cobaltite, so I take a quick water distillation detour, and our AE system is filling up with cobalt processing power. We'll need vanadium processing as well, but we're well out of tungsten steel, and it's easy enough to craft up a stock of vanadium at the moment. So let's make some high-speed steel, baby. HSSE is a blend of HSSG, cobalt, manganese, and silicon, and HSSS is an entirely more expensive blend of osmium, HSSG, and iridium. Passiving them is easy peasy, but cooling them presents a new challenge. They're so hot that we need liquid helium present to cool them down. So we're gonna need to upgrade our freezing setup. Moving it to a new spot for a change and adding our first upgrade is easy enough. Tag-based item exporters. Now, instead of manually coding the exports myself, anything tagged as a hot ingot will end up right in the freezer. Our next boost is to overclock it to ludicrous voltage for added speed, and lastly, a second freezer right next to it to cool down helium and send it into the main freezer. Although the system's backed up a bit after being off for so long, it will definitely catch up and then some. Last little bit we need is passive graphite, which is really easy to make from diamond dust with just 2 machines. And while making the graphite passive, I run into the high voltage macerator of doom. It crashes my game multiple times. But it's all worth it in the end, as now we have nearly everything passived for advanced SMDs. Nearly, because certain ingots like vanadium, gallium, and palladium I just don't need passived right now. So instead, I'll make an isolated EBF for use in AE autocrafting. Oh yeah, now there's no limits. Well, there's one limit. When encoding the EBF recipes, we can't leave them as default since hot ingots aren't used for anything. So we'll have to change the recipes to expect the cooled, usable ingots. And after a quick test, I verify that we can now autocraft every single advanced SMD part. Now to encode all the recipes we need for quantum circuits. Merely a few machines lay in our path to craft, so let's call them as we see them. Like a chemical bath to make reinforced epoxy sheets, an arc furnace for annealed copper ingots, and an autoclave for carbon fibers. And with that, we have every pattern and passive needed to demand the craft of any quantum-themed circuit. So just for fun, let's ask for 16 quantum mainframes, the ZPM tier circuit. But just look at those machines light up as they kick on, and god, those crafting steps are insane. Don't get me wrong, there are improvements I can make. Larger buses on the circuit assembler to force more bulk crafts, better parallel hatches down the line, but nothing beats 16 ZPM circuits deposited into my pocket with no more than a press of a button. Finally, everything can be automated, unless it requires an assembly line. Whoops.